All right, today we're going to learn about watercolor painting techniques. So some tools that you're going to need are your paper, a sponge cup, water cup filled halfway with different sizes of brushes, watercolor set, a roll of masking tape that you'll share with your table, pencil, and a Sharpie marker. And then we're also going to be using crayons for crayon resist, along with some salt and oil, actually. So those will be shared with your table. To get started, we're going to first always put our name on our paper. Anytime we start a painting, you always make sure to put our name on there and your class code. Then we're going to flip it over. Now, to get started, the goal of this project is we're going to be creating sections using a technique called tape resist. And so we're going to take tape and lay it out to create a cool pattern on our paper. And then in each of the sections, we're going to test out a little bit different kind of watercolor technique. So we're going to take that masking tape and you're just going to start tearing off pieces to lay out on your paper. You're also going to want a list of the different techniques we're going to use. So as you can see, we're going to be trying out 10 different techniques. So you're going to want to make sure that there's at least 10 different sections on your paper so that you have enough room to try out all those things. So as we're taping, you're going to make sure that you're counting as you go to make sure that there's enough room. So then I'm going to take the tape and I can crisscross it in different ways. You don't want to press it down too hard, otherwise it's really hard to get off the paper later. And it will tear your paper. So right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it looks like I need to split it up a little more. And if I have some extras, you can always test out things in other sections, like try a technique that you really liked and do it again. So I know I have at least more than 10. So the very first technique that we're going to talk about is how to create a wash, a simple wash. What you're going to use is, I like to use these wider brushes, so the big square ones like this. If your paints are kind of dried out, some of these are kind of watered already, but if your paints are dried out and they haven't been used, you can dip a little bit of water in there without touching your brush to the paint. Just wakes up the paints. Just wakes up the paints. So then you're going to just set them, just to get it started. Then I'm going to take that brush, and I want more water on my brush for this technique because I'm going to fill the whole area with the same color. So I'm going to take that blue and we'll do this one. I'm going to fill the whole space. If the color is really dark and you want it to be lighter, you can always add more water and blend that in. That's how you create a wash. I'm going to clean my brush out. My next technique is going to be wet on wet. So that means I'm going to be blending two colors together. So I'm going to start out with a color, just one color. Clean my brush out really good. If I need to, I can dab it off on my paper towel to clean it a little bit. Get all that paint out. Maybe we'll try yellow this time. So I'm going to go yellow in this square. A little more water to spread it out. You want it nice and watery for this, otherwise this technique doesn't work. I might switch to my green round brush for this part. So what I can do is choose a color that will mix well with that color, and I'm just going to take my paintbrush and sort of tap the paper in different spots, or draw lines through it. And as the paints they touch, they're both wet at the same time, so they blur and blend and create some really cool patterns. You can also use this technique to blend and mix colors as well. Our third option that we're going to do is gradient. So I like to start out with that flat brush again. So this would be really nice if you're doing like a sunset or something where you're changing from one color to another, and they're usually colors that blend and mix well together. So if I started out with red, I need a little bit more water so it wakes it up. I can paint a little bit of red. I'm going to wash my brush out. I get a little bit of orange. And I'm going to overlap them just a little bit. And where they overlap, they're going to mix and blend and kind of create this gradual transition. Wash my brush out again, make sure it's clean. And then I'm going to get a little bit of yellow. I'm going to start with yellow down here. Sort of work my way up and blend it into that orange. And it creates this nice gradient. Our next technique is going to be a graded wash. So what a graded wash is when you want to start with just one color, really, really dark. So you're going to get use a little bit of water, not a lot of water. And you're going to start with that color. So we'll do a graded wash maybe on this one. So what I'm going to do is start at the top where the color is the most intense, really dark, the least amount of water in it. I'm going to make sure I get enough pigment on there. And I'm going to paint that down a little bit. And I don't want to fill the whole space in with that. Then I'm going to clean my brush out really well. And I'm going to just take pure water and I'm going to start painting up towards that area. And I'm going to pull the paint from there into that watery area. And it creates this really cool shaded transition. So this is how you do shading with watercolor paints. So because I pulled some of those darker tones into the water, it lightened it up because the more water you have in paint, the lighter it gets. So this is also really cool for skies or other things that you're shading in a watercolor painting. Our next technique is going to be crayon resist, or you could also use oil pastels. You can try it out with white crayon or different kinds of colors of crayons. So I'm just going to choose a couple of colors. So maybe I'll do like a pattern over here, and I'm just going to draw it out on the plain paper first. And then I'm going to take my other color and maybe draw some shapes. So this is really nice for like patterns in your picture, or if you're doing like raindrops in the sky or stars, you can use a white crayon to do that. And then we're going to paint a wash on top of it. So let me get that nice and colored in. Use my big brush again, make sure it's nice and cleaned out. And maybe we will do some light blue over here. And wherever the crayon is, it's going to resist where the watercolor paint goes on top. Shows through. Clean my brush out again. Our next technique is dry brush. So what dry brush is that you have the least amount of water in your brush. So actually this is the time where you're going to want to like get that water out. You're going to choose your color. And you don't want barely any water in there. So like if I'm going to fill this area with dry brush, when I paint, it's going to leave kind of a texture on there because there's very little water on there. This is a good technique for like grass or trees or other things. So it has that scratchy look to it. My next technique that I'm going to show is oil. So I'm going to take, we'll start with green maybe. I want this to be really, really watery, so you're just basically going to fill that area, that color. You can also use rubbing alcohol. It has a similar effect. Make a wash, and then I'm going to take this little eyelet, get some oil in there, and just drip it in spots onto my paint. This technique's going to show up once the painting is dry. Our next technique we're going to do is salt. So I want a nice wash to start with this. I might actually do this, blend a little, two colors together, so maybe a little bit of purple and maybe even some black so that it looks like a pretty night sky. So I'm just mixing those colors together. This technique definitely works better on darker colors. I'm going to mix those in. I'm going to open the salt cup and sprinkle a little bit of salt onto the paper. Now when I let this dry and I come back to look at it, there's going to be cool little crystal markings all over it. And then it will make it look kind of like stars are showing through. Our next technique is going to be splatter, or you can also use a straw to blow the paint. I'm just going to show you splatter today. So I'm going to I like to use the little round brush for this, and I'm going to choose a color that I want to splatter onto my paper. And I'm going to put it really low down to the paper, and I'm going to take the tip of my finger and actually pull it back and let it flick directly down at the paper. We do have a splatter paint box if you're doing a bigger piece and you don't want it to get it all over the table, because you do want to be careful you're not splattering on someone else's painting. You can wipe off any extra onto the sponge. Maybe I want to do another color layered on top of that, so I'm going to wash my brush out. Maybe we'll do a little orange. And that is the splatter technique. Another technique you can use is a straw blowing technique. So this makes it look kind of like an explosion is happening. So what you can do is I like to use the small round brush. You do want it to be really watery for this technique, so I'm going to load up my brush, and I'm just going to, from whatever corner I want to start, going to put a little puddle of watercolor paint in that little corner. Like I said, it needs to be watery. And you're going to get really low down, and you're going to direct the straw towards the direction that you want the explosion to be. So I'm going to blow into my straw. If you want to mix some other colors, you can kind of do that on top. So maybe I'll put in a little bit of yellow. And that is the straw technique. Now that my blue wash is dry, I'm actually going to show you the wet on dry technique. So this is really nice if you want to add on detail to your drawing, like if you're painting, if you're making something that you need to add on another layer of texture, like in a flower petal or a lake, like waves in the lake, or texture in the grass. So what you're going to do is you don't want as much water on your brush for this technique. You're going to choose what color you want to layer on top. So I'm just going to do purple. And now what I can do is choose what kind of design that I want to create, or whatever kind of texture you're doing, whatever effect you need it to be. And as you can see, the paint does not mix with the paint underneath because that has already dried. So that's the difference between wet on dry, wet on dry and wet on wet, because this one, as you can see, all those lines and dots kind of blurred and blended, whereas these are going to stay really nice and crisp. Now what you can also do is go ahead and take off your tape. And the cool thing about using this tape as a resist method is that it leaves behind white areas. So you can go in and add designs on those parts. You could draw designs in. Wherever you didn't want that paint to go, the tape stops the paint from getting in those areas. And creates kind of a cool design.